Hey everyone, I decided to give you a little guide to the cases since your flip is not about thinking about the cases. Um, so this will just give you a little bit of overview of each of the cases and some things to focus on with them. But in addition to going through each of the cases, just a couple of reminders as you go through your second case study. First thing I should mention is that your first case studies will be graded by the end of the day, Monday, so that you'll have feedback on them to help you with your second case study this week. Okay, so reminders. First thing to just remember is that your introduction, you don't want to just start right off with um, you know, here's a question, here's my answer. You want to give a little bit, ease the reader in, give some context about what's going on. You want to sort of imagine that your audience is someone who hasn't actually read the case. So you want to give a little bit of background on what's going on with the case without rewriting the whole thing. You don't need to include the question that I asked about the case, but it's actually fine if you do that. So you could say, like, here's some background. This leads to the following question, and you could just act like you're coming up with that question. And then you can literally say, I would answer this question the following way. And that's your thesis. Now, remember that you always want to highlight some of the main reasons behind your view. And I'll give you an example of this when I go through the actual cases themselves. But you don't want to just say, my opinion is that you should do X, but you should do X for reasons A and B, right? Okay. Other thing is a reminder, the thing that's always hardest is that whatever view you argue for, you want to make sure that you can respect arguments on the other side or from a complete competing perspective. So you can do that a lot of different ways. One way to do that is you give the introduction and then like literally right after the intro, you should say, before getting into my argument for my view, someone might take the other side on this. Here's what they would say. Here's why. Here's why I think ultimately that view doesn't work. You could also do it in reverse, which is, give your whole argument first, and then before your conclusion, say, now I'm going to consider some objections or what somebody on the other side might say. You sort of walk through what the arguments on the other side would be, and then explain why you think still your side has more compelling reasons on their side. You could also sort of bounce back and forth. So if there's like three or four different sort of types of considerations in the case, you could sort of go one at a time and be like, okay, in this consideration, here's my view. Here's the view on the other side. Here's why I think I'm right. Then go to the next consideration. I think that's pretty hard to do and keep it organized. So I wouldn't recommend it, but it is something that you could certainly do if you wanted. A couple of you asked about citing in the first case, and I put an announcement about it. So just here's a reminder. If you quote from the case, you can just say according to the case and then put your quote in. But the case is also going to mention other people. So the case might say, according to Ben Affleck, and then you wouldn't say according to the case. You would say according to Ben Affleck, and you're just relying on the quote from the case. So I give the example, according to the Center for Disease Control. So then you just basically say the same thing. According to the Center for Disease Control, and then provide the quote, or if the case paraphrases it, you can leave it as a paraphrase. You don't need to put like a citation of that beyond having said that. So if you make any in-text reference to anything, like according to the Center for Disease Control or according to the case, I'm going to assume that comes directly from the case. So if you do bring in any outside research, which you do not need to do, but it might help for you, if you do that, then you do need a works cited page or some footnotes or some way for me to know where you're getting your additional information. I want that to be done in MLA format. So MLA format has two parts to it. You would need a little parenthetical, in other words, a little parentheses with like the author's name and a page number if it was from a written source, or the name of the website, whatever. If you do that, and then that needs to sort of refer the reader to a works cited page. So some of you have probably taken English 101 or 102, or in high school you've become familiar with basic citation. But there's all different formats. Some people use APA, some people use Chicago. Philosophy, we use MLA, which is the Modern Language Association. So if you're not familiar with how to do cite using that, you just Google Purdue OWL MLA, and that'll take you right to a guide for MLA citations from the Purdue University's online writing lab. All right, so let's get into the cases. There's 7 of them you can pick from, so way more than last time. Case number 1 is a fictional case, but it raises some interesting things. So 2 characters meet in an online gaming environment. They start flirting and they develop a relationship, and that relationship is going to carry over through multiple gaming environments and carries over even to explicit environments where the characters have sex and things like that. So at one point, one character says to the other, like, what's your real name? We should meet. And then the other character says, like, whoa, whoa, whoa. That would be like cheating. I'm happily married. No thanks. So it raised an interesting question. Did the married person do anything wrong? And so you want to sort of think and be able to divide that up, right? There's some interesting considerations about whether they did anything wrong to the person that they're interacting with, but also, is this a form of cheating on one's spouse, right? So were they lying or deceiving the person that they were interacting, or is that all part of the gameplay? Does it count as cheating on a spouse? Things like that. So, and of course, if you want to go a little deeper into sort of theoretical background, you could talk about how Kant might handle things like deception and cheating. Case number 2, this is about people going to China to get organs from executed prisoners. So you've got a couple of things to think about here, right? So the case is going to talk about the fact that some of the people being executed are likely innocent. There's not a lot of due process. And so that raises some questions. Some people might say, well, they're being killed anyways, so what's it matter if I go take advantage of it? But they're making money from selling these organs, so are they being killed anyways, or are the people who going actually sort of creating a market that then gets fed by these executions, right? So there's this question of, are they partially morally responsible? There's issues here of consent. There's issues here about limits of what we can do to save our own lives. And there's even logistical considerations like, what happens when you go get an organ and your doctor's like, whoa, where'd you get that? And obviously, since you don't have a medical history for the organ, it can cause complications. So the reason, partly I'm, I guess, just being a nice guy here to tell you, like, here's some things that you could put in. I'm sure you'd be able to figure a lot of these things out. But one thing I want to remind you of is that when you do these different considerations, you want to sort of group them so that if you're talking about issues of consent, that gets a paragraph. If you're talking about logistical things, that gets a paragraph. Not that you're all over the place where you're like, oh, yeah, and another thing is over here and back to this other thing. So organization matters. So this is where outlines and rough drafts can really pay off. I'm not going to make you do that, but it might help you. Case 3 is about paid maternity leave. So the U.S. does not have a legal right to paid maternity leave. Some companies might do it to attract workers, but countries in Germany have very generous paid leave. And so you might think you're being asked to think about whether we should do it too. And there's a lot of benefits of being able to stay home with the child. But of course, somebody's got to pay to make that happen. And also the case mentions that there might be some unintended consequences, because if it's maternity leave, that means it's the mother who can stay home. And that means that it's typically going to make gender divides in the workplace and at home worse if you think that that's a bad thing. So that it's sort of, really kind of like, yep, women stay home with the kid, men get back to work, that kind of thing. And that could also, of course, affect women's salaries long term. Case 4 is about a couple. The wife gets Alzheimer's, and the couple make a promise to each other that if she gets bad, that they're going to both end their lives. In the case you mentioned, you see I mentioned it here. It's a very Kantian case because there's a promise, and so Kant would sort of say, well, you can't make a lying promise. So if the husband had, promised his wife, yes, I will end your life, knowing full well he wasn't going to do it, that seems troubling. But seems like the promise was sincere. After all, it was kept. But it raises some interesting questions. Maybe there's some promises that are wrong to make in the first place and wrong to keep. Kant, you can't throw away your freedom. So you have some interesting, is just as simple as that. Is suicide wrong and always or not? So things to think about there. Next case, forced sterilization. Again, consent. You're going to see in these cases that a lot of these cases are going to bring up things that a Kantian approach or a virtue ethics approach might highlight. And you're just learning ethics of care, so you might not be ready to make use of that yet, but who knows. So here we have a severely cognitively impaired young adult woman whose mother knows that she can't take care of herself, and the mother is dying and is worried that her daughter, who's going to have to go live in a group home, could wind up pregnant and then have the child taken from her because she can't take care of it. And in order to prevent that from happening, is considering sterilizing her daughter without telling her, or in a way that the daughter would not understand. And of course, a doctor would have to be part of that. So, sort of this question of whether it matters that you have a mother there as opposed to some stranger or a doctor who knows the family really well. There's also a very, very bad history of forced sterilization, especially in the United States, especially with people who were thought of as being mentally incompetent. Historically, in the United States, it's even worse than that because it was usually poor people that they just called mentally incompetent. So if it says she's severely mentally incompetent and can't take care of herself, I don't think what you should do in this. I don't think in this case it'd be fair to just be like, you don't know. You have to take the facts as facts, or at least, as likely. Case 6 is about Natalie Dillon. It's a true story about a young woman who decides to sell her virginity online. And really, this question is really simple. Like, if somebody has a big problem with this, are they just being sort of old-fashioned or prudish? Or are there real moral problems with this? And so, is she harming anyone? Is setting an example a big deal? Is she treating herself as a means only, or she's using this money to further her education? So maybe not. Are there virtue ethics considerations in terms of character? Maybe it's admirable traits, maybe not. So pretty interesting to think through that. Finally, loopy juice. Some monks make caffeinated wine in Scotland, and everyone's using it and getting all messed up on it and committing crimes. And so when you have a product that's really harmful, is there sort of responsibility not to manufacture this harmful product? But then you get questions about, well, is it the manufacturer's fault or the consumer, a little bit of both? One thing that might be interesting here is, are some products just like almost impossible to use responsibly? It's one thing to like mix vodka and Red Bull. It might be different if like it's already mixed and it's hard to use it responsibly. There's also this interesting question about virtue ethics and whether the selling of this as monks is an issue because it's in keeping with their values or not. It helps to know that a lot of religious orders have sold wine throughout history and beer, and they use the money often to help do other good deeds. So it's not as simple as just be like, that's crazy. All right, there's a little bit of an overview. I look forward to reading them.